FireFly Pose is an advanced arm balance which is far from easy. So this video is designed to help you learn how to work on it and what to focus on to improve. There are two variations of FireFly Pose: hips high and legs parallel to the mat, and hips low with toes pointing up towards the sky. The one that you find easier will depend where your strengths and weaknesses lie. Very broadly, those with more flexibility may find the low hips easier, and those with less flexibility and perhaps a little more strength may find the high hips version easier. But we'll look at the why that might be in just a moment. No matter which of the variations you're working on, warming up is essential. There's a great deal of strength and flexibility needed for this pose, so a cold, unprepared body just ain't gonna cut it. If you look at the shape of the body in this pose, ignoring the hand balancing bit, you can see we're essentially in a wide leg forward fold. Imagine yourself sat on the floor with your legs in a straddle, so a big V shape. Now fold forwards. If you folded deep enough, you might be able to pass your arms underneath your legs and into tortoise pose. Now balance this shape onto your hands and you near enough have FireFly Pose. This goes a long way in helping to understand why flexibility favours the low hip version. It takes less core strength to hold the hips low down near the mat, as opposed to lifting that heavy pelvis high up away from it. So if the flexibility isn't a hurdle for you, that low down hip version takes a lot less strength and is likely to come to you a little easier. So hopefully it goes without saying that warming up with your wide leg forward fold is absolutely essential. I like to start with the standing version where gravity can help me out, and then progress on to the seated version where your body has to work a little bit harder to pull you into that stretch. If you want to achieve straight legs in this arm balance, your chest would need to be able to fold very close to the floor in this stretch. Without this flexibility, either the legs will not straighten or your hips will need to stay a little higher up to lessen the intensity of the fold and allow space in the body for your hamstrings to lengthen. So in the name of those long hamstrings that we're after, I'll link a hamstring focus class at the very end of this video, which actually includes this pose towards the end. But as well as that wide leg forward fold, these are your most useful poses to focus on in your warm-up. Skandasana, pyramid, lizard and extended lizard, seated compass. But then let's also look at this pose with bent legs. The closeness of the thighs and the belly, that compression, is what we need in order to have space to lift up into this pose. So when the legs are bent, you're likely to find that your belly and thighs can come much closer together than if the legs were straight. This is your lower back and hip flexibility coming into play and isn't needed in such huge amounts as the hamstrings, which is why many people find shoulder pressure pose so much more accessible than FireFly. If this is still a very difficult movement direction for you, you'd be better placed working on your shoulder pressure pose first. Those warm-up stretches I just mentioned were cleverly chosen, as most include a good deal of hip stretching too, so they're nice, effective poses to prepare for your FireFly. This pose is also very demanding on our wrist strength and flexibility. Your hips are behind your wrists and are a very heavy part of your body. Therefore, we have to lean a little forwards with the shoulders to prevent plopping down onto our bum. This takes the wrists into a big range of extension, whilst also supporting the body weight. So here are some movements to do to help prepare and strengthen the wrists. Tabletop wrist movements, plank leans, down dog holds, fist grabs. Just like there are two versions of FireFly, there are also two main entries for this pose. Number one, from standing. Start with your feet shoulder distance apart and then fold forwards into this half squat, half forward fold kind of shape. The most important part here is to get the belly and thighs as closely connected as possible. Use your core strength to think of sandwiching them together. The hands then need to go in place behind the heels. Just the fingertips is fine for now. Before you go any further, really try to bury your shoulders as far under your thighs as you can. I always like to think of it like putting on a backpack with my own legs. Odd concept, but effective. Getting those legs as far up the arm as possible is where the hip flexibility is challenged the most. So this gives you a good indication of what to work on if this is your struggling point. From this squat forward fold hybrid kind of shape, start to sit down towards the back of your own arms. You can either choose to drop the hips as low as possible as you lift the chest and look forward, or keep the hips high and the chest and gaze down towards the floor. For either or both of these versions, the connection point for the back of the thigh and the arm is a really important place to focus your attention. Press your legs against your arms as you push your arms back in towards your legs to solidify them together. This shape will naturally cause your upper back to round and shoulders to roll forwards, but put your strength into trying to roll them back to broaden your chest and cement those legs and arms together. Once you have this tight compression of legs against arms, you're ready to give your hamstrings the hard work. Simply extending the legs is really all I can tell you to do here. Press away through the balls of your feet and engage your quads by pulling your kneecaps towards your hips. Think of lengthening out through your spine, either by continuing to lift the chest and to grow forwards, or growing longer between your hips and your shoulders. If the legs don't straighten, then they don't straighten. But doing this pose with bent legs is a pretty badass place to be, and make peace with the fact that this takes time and patience is a virtue. And maybe spend an extra 10 minutes each practice dedicated to those hamstrings. Number 2, from seated. In my personal practice, I find this entry easier for the low hip version, but it certainly makes life harder for the high hip version. And considering what I've already mentioned about flexibility, I feel that this categorizes this entry overall as the harder one. But again, your body is not my body. Give it a try and make your own decision about that. So those backpack legs I spoke about earlier, you're going to need to find them again. From seated, get one leg swung as far over your arm as you can. Again, aiming it as high up towards the shoulder as possible. This leg then needs to hold on tight by clamping the leg around the arm whilst you do the second one. It's not a particularly graceful entry, but that's not what this is all about, is it? Once both legs are in place, put your hands onto the mat in front of your hips about shoulder width apart. Keep those legs clamping and lean your body weight forwards over the hands. Press down to lift the pelvis off the floor as you keep your torso as upright as possible. Once, or if you're up, you're back to that place of simply extending the legs. Modifications. This is a tricky pose to modify, as an easier version is simply a different pose. But as mentioned, working on shoulder pressure pose is a great starting place. As I mentioned in my previous tutorial, practicing this pose on blocks may make the standing entry a little bit more accessible, but it certainly won't make the seated easier. Depending on where your limitations are, you may find progress by working on your high hips version, finding the strength in the legs to extend them straight, and then little by little allowing the hips to drop as the chest rises. Over time, you might suddenly find yourself in the low hip version. But do remember that it takes strength in the legs to extend them, providing you aren't as flexible and as elastic band. Don't expect them to simply reach out and be straight. You've really got to work for it. I don't feel this pose needs an advanced section of this tutorial like I've given for many of my others. If you've got your FireFly nailed, congratulations. Thanks for watching and good luck with your arm balance practice. As mentioned, this hamstrings class would be a great one to help you work on the flexibility that you need for FireFly Pose, or you can check out this playlist for my other tutorials. I'd love for you to leave me a comment if you found this helpful, and don't forget to subscribe to be sure to catch my next video.